All right, so today we're going to talk about the table saw. Table saw is one of the main tools used in the wood shop. Okay, we mostly use it for ripping. Okay, we're going to get into that more of that later. Main thing with the table saw, just like with any power machine, you always want to wear safety glasses. You want to take off hoodie strings, tie up loose hair, take off long jewelry. You don't want anything that can get caught in revolving machinery. So we're going to discuss some of the major parts of the table saw before we get started actually using it here. Okay, so we've got this is the fence system right here. This is the fence. This is the rail it slides on table. This is the working side of the table, and this over here is the auxiliary side of the table. It's important that anytime we're using the table saw, we don't have anything over here except the piece that we're cutting. That's it. No tape measures, plans, pencils, materials, nothing over here. Everything that we're about to cut should be stored over here on the auxiliary side of the fence. If we're going to have a push stick available for our use, we want it on the auxiliary side of the fence. The only thing over here is the board you're actually cutting. So let's get you closer here. Right here is the guard. This indicator right here, it snaps in position. This gives you an idea of the height of the blade. I can tell that the height of the blade is just a little bit more than the height of the board, and that's what I want. I want the blade coming up through the board no more than 1/8 inch, 1/8 inch maximum. And that's what this little feature, so that you don't have to flip up the guard to actually check it and get your fingers in close to the blade every time. We'll see that that is actually the case. The blade is a little bit higher than the top of the board right there. There you can see it, hopefully. Think of it this way. If I was to have a horrible accident, run all 4 fingers through the blade, I would rather make a cut through all 4 fingers that's 1/8 of an inch deep versus 1 inch deep, which would just cut all 4 fingers off. That's a good way to think of it, why we keep that 1/8 inch maximum beyond the top of the board as a maximum height. So this is the guard right here. Flip that up for a second. This is the throat plate. Okay, we have a throat plate that surrounds the blade. If I was to use a wider blade, that's material for another video. We would use a throat plate with a wider slot in it. Right here we've got anti-kickback fingers. Closer yet. And what these do, there's this one and another one just like it on the other side, and then we have this one. And what these do is as the wood goes through, it grips the wood so that it can't get kicked out backwards, which we call kickback. This right here is called the splitter, one of the most important pieces on the table saw. It basically, as we make a cut, we make what we call a saw curve, a split in the wood. And so as we make that cut, the board goes down both sides of the splitter, and the splitter keeps that saw curve from collapsing. Sometimes there are forces inside that board that want to pinch it shut on the blade, which can cause violent kickback. The splitter keeps it from collapsing, keeps that curve open, and keeps the wood from collapsing on the blade, which causes kickback. This splitter, in conjunction with these anti-kickback fingers, or pawls as they call them, makes this a very safe tool to use. These are great added features for this tool. So I'm always going to, I'm always going to be running the table saw from right here close to the controls, not behind the blade. I never want to be directly behind the blade. If kickback should occur, it's going to be directly straight back from the blade. This is the most dangerous place to be. If someone is walking behind the table saw while it's running, for one thing, they should have been, they have been taught that that is not safe. But if there is someone walking behind the table saw, you should pause operations in case there was a kickback. Never stand directly behind the blade. I'm going to stay over here to the left next to the controls. Over here, we've got this big paddle switch, big safety switch. I pull it out to start it. I push that big paddle to stop it. I usually position myself so that I can just bump it with my leg in an emergency and everything is turned off. Down here, this would be the elevation wheel. This right here, I would loosen the center nut, and then I can adjust this wheel, and that raises and lowers the blade for different thicknesses of wood to be cut. After making adjustments, I always want to retighten that center wheel so it does not move, so the vibration of the saw running doesn't make it change. Same thing over here. This is the tilt wheel. I would loosen the center nut right here, and then I can change the angle of the blade here so that I can make different angle cuts. Anytime that I would change the angle to anything other than a 90-degree cut, I would always want to put it back to 90 degrees when I'm finished and tighten the center nut. Okay. Keep this position back. So, a couple things here. If I'm going to cut a board, I always want to make sure I've got a straight edge here to go against the fence. If I don't have a true edge on this board, then I should not be cutting it. I should make sure it has a true edge first. We know that we do that over on the joiner. That's why we've already covered it. So some people, really bugs them that they cannot see this actually being cut. There's really nothing for you to look at. You just need to know it's being done. When I'm making a cut, I'm watching here. I'm watching the fence to make sure my board stays tight against the fence. I don't need to see the cut. I'm always watching the fence to make sure the board's tight against the fence. If it's tight against the fence, I know I'm making a second true edge parallel to the first. If I start to stray away from that fence, I know it's not an accurate cut. So minimum clearances here, you should always keep your fingers at least 4 inches away from the blade. I cannot cut this board and keep my fingers 4 inches away from the blade. So I'm going to use a push stick. So what I can start the board through my cut and then use a push stick to hold it down against the table, against the fence. I can use 2 push sticks if I prefer. The use of a second push stick would look something like this. I've got 1 push stick holding it down against the table. I've got another right here holding it against the fence. And you can see it keeps my fingers well away from the cut. Got lots of push sticks laying around for everybody to use. A lot of times, and this is always easier to use if you have an assistant. Doesn't matter how big a piece you're cutting, it's always nicer if you have an assistant. But the assistant needs to understand that they are not to pull the board through the saw. They are not to steer the board. All they do is support it and catch it as it comes out. The operator should always push the board from this side. Anytime, as with any other machine, if something should get caught down close to the blade, before we put our fingers in there, then we want to disconnect power before we get our fingers in there. The fence on this is a nice precision fence we've got. So what I'm going to do, getting close, you see the red pointer tells me what I'm cutting. So I'm making a cut at 3 inches here. That pointer is accurate, and then I'm going to lock it down here, and the fence is in position, won't move. Okay? So what we're going to do, I'm going to start the saw. Don't lay stuff up here and then start it. Just like with the joiner, you know, it's just a good idea to not have any material on the machine when you actually start it. Start it, grab your material, and then go. If you think you're going to need push sticks, I know I'm going to need push sticks for this, and then get those close. Okay? So here we go. Got it tied against the fence. Starting my cut. Got one push stick holding it against the table, another holding it against the fence. I'm watching the fence throughout the cut. Now, best to turn it off, let it come to a stop, and then we can pull these scraps out that are right next to the blade. And we're going to get rid of these. Another thing to note, let me get the piece I just cut. I'm going to add one more thing here. If I want to cut this board, if I want to cut it this way, that cut can be done on the table saw, but not with the fence. We would use what we call a miter gauge. We're not going to get into that today. This is a safety video, not necessarily everything I can do with a table saw video. We have a tool that does it better. The miter saw will make that cross cut much more safely. Anytime you're cutting a board, the more that this dimension exceeds this dimension, the more dangerous this cut is. This is not a safe cut. I've seen kids try to do it. I've seen kids try to do it after they've seen this demonstration and after we talked about the miter saw as well. Do not make this cut. I don't have a very big guiding surface here. What's going to happen is I'm going to start to push it through. I'm going to hit that blade. It's going to start to drag a little bit, like so. And then I'm going to realize, hey, I'm falling away from the fence. And I'm going to try to correct it. It's going to pinch, and boom, it's going to kick back. And table saw kickbacks can be rather violent. That is the conclusion of basic safety operations on the table saw.